Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. So, for Startup Masterclass today, we have Jabu, and we're really excited to have her here this morning because we've looked at her background, and we're in a phase where we're growing our company too as well, and we want to study how human resources is done in growing companies. And Jabu's had three experiences that I've seen are very very exciting. Once at Airbnb, then next at TaskRabbit, and then at Shyp. And these three companies had very different outcomes a few years later. And so we're really happy to have her here today. We've got some questions that we want to ask and receive guidance and mentorship from. So actually, the first question is just an icebreaker. Were you at the Roush or at Rhode Island when you started at Airbnb, Jabu?
I was Rhode Island,
Oh, okay.
so I both Roush, yeah.
Excellent. And the thing I wanted to always there's this curiosity I had. I remember I only heard this as a legend. I never actually experienced this myself. I happened to work at Airbnb back in it was 2012 2013 in the Singapore office, and I heard this legend
Nice.
that I went through like about I forgot like it was almost like 12 interviews or something, but it was pretty
Mhm.
normal to do that, and then Brian would be the last person to interview, and then he would ask a question like, "How lucky are you?" Was that an actual fact, or was it just kind of like a legend that grew inside, like I don't know, the company later?
Yeah, someone might have made that story up.
Okay. Okay.
Well, I can say I did 20 interviews over a 3-month period before I was hired. So it was
20
very stressful,
interviews.
20, which was half of the company at the time. They were 40 people.
Oh,
And so, yeah, Brian did prefer up until we were about, I would say 150, but it wasn't scalable to have him do all of the interviews. Just on the customer service team alone, I was taking it from 16 to 100 plus. So there was no way with Brian's schedule to coordinate all of that. So I had to cut him a little bit out of that loop.
wow, that is cool. All right, you got to, and this kind of goes back to this question of like growing teams from 0 to 1, from 1 to 10,
Mm,
from let's say 10 to 100, right?
yeah.
You've seen this, and this is pretty much the theme of I think this conversation. You've seen the foundational impact of HR, and you've seen like how this foundation can result in very different outcomes to where the company has gone. How would you say you would describe the contrasting experiences in the way that HR was facilitated at Airbnb, at TaskRabbit, and at Shyp, and what did that do in terms of how they eventually wound up to be?
Yeah, I mean, very different companies and trajectories. Obviously, for those of you guys who don't know, I was at Airbnb from 40 to 500. And at the time I was there, we expanded into two different offices. So before actually Rhode Island, there was an office on 10th and Mission, which was a little garage that we worked out of. And it had no offices. We used to have to go out into the alleyway to have meetings. And the company was about 40 people then, and we grew into 12 other offices in 12 other countries while I was there. So it was just this explosive, amazing time. I think the difference between Airbnb and a lot of other companies was not necessarily that HR was so foundational. The founders were kind of unfamiliar with HR at that time, but that culture was really important to them, and they were amazing at assessing who would be a good fit for Airbnb's culture at that time. And so the other companies that I worked with definitely tried to mimic that in certain ways. We had similar trajectories. At the time that I joined Airbnb, there were 30 people. They grew to 90 under my help and support, and we moved into Europe during that time as well. And then Shyp was from 16 people to 300. And that was only domestic, so no international there, though something we had discussed at the time. So all of these companies and all of these CEOs very much valued internal culture. But again, HR isn't always, I think now, we're talking about 2011 to, 2020. So there's been a tremendous shift in how much HR is seen as a pivotal sort of resource to startups. And I think now you tend to get a lot more airtime with your CEOs, where you can help to really build and guide and help design that culture in a way that supports employees. So I would say that's the biggest change. Since I can't talk too much about specifics, I would just say each one of those CEOs had kind of a different perspective on how to do that.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And in terms of like how you actually find that first person to start
Mm,
your HR team, and
yeah.
taking those 20 interviews, um, and been through that, being having gone through that process yourself, how would
Right.
you find yourself? How would you like hire a person to launch
Yeah.
your whole HR program?
Well, I came very much outside of the startup world. So I was not a typical employee. I was 40 years old. I was older than most of my founders at the time.
Okay.
So all three of the founders at Airbnb were under 30 when I started there, and had not had professional experience and not necessarily worked with an HR person before. So a lot of it was kind of navigating the difference between the corporate HR work that I had done for 13 years before that at a company called Nordstrom, which is a huge retail company.
Yeah.
You might know it. But and that contrasted very sharply, obviously, with startup HR, which was much more creative and reactive and solution oriented rather than political or traditional. And I found that I really loved that space. I will say what I look for in my HR people is not necessarily that they have certification or they've gone to school for HR, but that they have a deep passion and love for the employees that they're supporting and serving. And that's just something you can't teach. So for example, if payroll messes up someone's paycheck, is that person bending over backwards to try to make sure that they get paid? Or are they like, oh, they'll get paid in a couple weeks, I'm not worried about it? So someone that's just incredibly driven to do whatever they can to make their employees' lives better. It's a little tough to tell that in interview processes, but generally speaking, it's someone that has had a passion about some type of work that is similar to taking care of people, and it can run the gamut. So it could be in retail, it could be in restaurant work, it could be in caring for elderly. It really could be almost anything, but that's what I look for my teams.
Okay. That sounds kind of similar to the world of hospitality in a way. And
Yeah.
yeah, I've found actually this is a question I just thought of actually, which is having gone under like a 20 interview process, right? 20-person interview process, 20 stage. What ultimately would you say a was there a more efficient way to do that, or is that what is necessary to get that first
Yeah.
person? Yeah.
No, that was the first thing that I changed when I came to the company.
Okay, so 20 to 12. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, for me, actually, it was amazing because every interview that I had, I interviewed them and I learned more about the company and the culture. So
Yes.
I knew exactly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It
Um,
went both ways. I remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So it's a very iterative process and I found it fascinating, but I was totally not impressed with the efficiency of the productivity. But at that time, remember, like Airbnb was still thought of as this really weird concept where you let strangers into your home. So there was no funding, there was nothing like glamorous about it at all. So they didn't need to have a sense of urgency. And so very different space.
Okay, got it. Got it. Got it. All right. So it seemed like everybody meant really well, right? At the beginning, Shyp meant well, TaskRabbit meant well, and Airbnb meant well. But what
Yep.
happened in the end is Shyp went out of business, I believe. TaskRabbit,
Yep.
Leia, I think eventually sold, right? She got acquired by another company.
They got acquired by IKEA. And
IKEA, right?
so
Right. That's right. And then Airbnb became a like this super unicorn. Um,
mhm.
do you believe it could have been any other way? Like, was their fate sealed from the beginning, or was there something like about the people composition or about, like, say, the way that they focus on culture or something that could have changed their trajectory. And I ask that because having a startup myself, I've seen how people can really like delay or accelerate your progress or even capsize the
Yeah.
company. So did you see any of that or like what is your uh, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, interestingly, Airbnb is a very different company now than when I joined it. And it is very, I mean, obviously, right? But very successful monetarily, which it became very rapidly once I joined, just timing of it. It had nothing to do with me. But I don't know that I would still be happy there as an employee. So I think there's different ways to measure success, right? There's different stages of startup experiences that are really enjoyable to some people and later stages which are less. I am infinitely more interested in the discovery, the design, the building, right? Maybe you are too.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, again, I'm hesitant to like qualify everything as binary. I would say investors are probably super happy with Airbnb, and for employees that had that 10, 12-year career there, what an amazing experience. But even for me, who was only there foundationally, but for only a couple of years, it was an amazing career launching experience as well. So the other companies, I would just say what I typically see, and this is Silicon Valley based, so not holistic necessarily, is that there's a tendency to expand too quickly and to get into too many things. And you actually saw this a little bit in Airbnb as well, where there was a lot of sort of interest in different types of ways that they could broaden the platform. And a lot of those actually did not work out, right?
I
We
remember.
don't think of it as failure because they're still going strong.
Right.
But for lesser companies who have less funding, that can be the death knell of the company. And so I would say probably TaskRabbit, they probably consider themselves quite successful in the end. Shyp, obviously not so much, but that was a huge sort of concept that was maybe a little bit ahead of its time. Like, I wonder if it would work really well now in COVID. It was a company that, right,
Yeah,
that picked up packages.
I don't want to go anywhere. Please just come and pick up my packages and ship them off.
Yeah, so people would come pick them up, take to the post office for you. You didn't have to do it. I loved it because I hate going to the post office. So I think this is what's fascinating about a career in the startup world is that, and even for you personally and internally, you almost can't measure from the outside what success looks like. It's just what you yourself have learned. And I would say probably for all of those founders, they're smart enough people that they can go on and continue to succeed if they wanted to, given what they've learned. And I myself have lost and owned businesses and done things that on the outside looked like failure, but that led me to the career that I have now. And so I really wouldn't replace them, right?
Got it. Got it. Got it. That's actually pretty
Yeah.
amazing. I'm reminded of there's a Chinese allegory about a man who loses his horse, right? And it's actually a fairly interesting tale because it's a chain of unfortunate events that result in fortunate events that result in unfortunate events that result in new fortune again. And that seems to be yeah, that seems to be what I'm hearing.
It's my story.
Yeah. It's I think it's really common in the journey of an entrepreneur to see that, like, whatever becomes a failure at the moment then becomes the kind of like the foundation for the next iteration. Um,
Yeah. And
cool.
just to throw in a little bit more on that, Jing, unless
Yes.
we don't have time.
Oh yeah,
The,
yeah. Please do. Please do. Absolutely. Yeah.
well, just for some more perspective on that, I had moved to South Africa in 2009 to start a business there and lived there for 2 years and wasn't able to get the business off the ground and lost everything that I had to move back to the States with a couple $1,000s in my pocket and no idea of what I would do next. And so when I interviewed at Airbnb, I was coming from what was certainly, by anyone's estimation, a complete failure and not really sure what I would do with the rest of my life.
Uh huh.
But I told that story in my interviews and I wasn't embarrassed about it. And I believe that's one of the reasons I got hired there.
Wow, this is actually really, really moving for me because I faced a very similar circumstance when I got hired at Airbnb as well. I had been in Bali for
Wow.
8 years, and I started this company again. But this is the fourth time we've had to do it. Actually, this is the fourth iteration of Bukit Vista. So
Right.
almost the exact same thing. I completely failed. I started it, went bankrupt, and then I went back to the States. I never thought I'd get a job at Airbnb. I thought that would be like, like going to Harvard or something. And and I actually went and I did this conference at Harvard, and somehow that got Airbnb's attention. And it was about the sharing
Right.
economy. And I remember that feeling. I remember the feeling of having almost no money in the bank account and just scrapping by, eating pizza and beer at meetup.com was where I would find my next meal. I would be like, all right, let me go to a meetup, let me eat, and maybe I'll associate and find some work through this too. So yeah, that was, and maybe because I did hear that like whether it's legend or not, I did get that
Mhm.
feeling that everybody at Airbnb was part of the culture was feeling lucky. Part of the culture was having strived through and met success through some way or the other, but also being deeply
Yeah.
grateful about that. And
Yes.
do you think that that was something that was instrumental in shaping culture? Like if you could hire people
Mm.
who felt lucky, then
Yes.
you could actually then build a culture where people could grow and be even luckier.
Yeah. I think there was there was sort of magic about Airbnb in specific that we kind of conveyed this warmth and excitement and interest in other people, similar to what you're doing here. Um, that translated into people feeling very lucky to have that experience. And so I think it's that engagement, right? It's like the sharing economy. So even during the interview process, my goal was always that people, whether we hired them or not, left that experience bigger fans of the company than they entered into it. And actually, I learned a lot about that from this company, Nordstrom, that I worked for, and this concept of customer service and servant leadership and how do you make people feel seen and heard comes a little bit from my culture as an African American, but this idea that really quickly and immediately you're trying to connect with people and share with them, whether it's video, because a lot of my interviews were over video back then. Um, I did my whole interview process on Skype because I was still in Africa when I started interviewing. So I think, again, a lot of these lessons are really amazing for COVID right now. And I just, as we're talking, I keep resonating with this that if you can convey these kind of thoughts and ideas as an HR person, you can bring a company together and bring a culture together and really knit something really tightly woven together. The opposite of that, obviously, is staying disconnected and staying distant from your employees, which is the opposite of what I always tried to do. You can't make everybody happy in HR, but just continuously trying to connect human being to human being, I think is what makes the work really fulfilling.
Okay, got it. Speaking of HR programs, there's a question by Alethea, and it's around this idea of prioritization and starting a program. I'll turn over to Alethea. Alethea, let's hear your question.
Okay, yeah, hi Jabu. So I
Hi.
think my question was like, in terms of prioritization. So let's say
Mhm.
you have 100 units of credits when you were starting a HR team. Like which sector exactly, or like how would you like allocate these credits in terms of like which sector do you think is of highest priority? Maybe like in terms of recruitment, compensation, training, and development. Yeah. Thank you.
Good question, Alethea. I'm going to give you a probably. I would be prioritizing simply doing the work across all of those spectrums. So the HR work that I do is not very easy to bucket. So typically you're doing many, many things all at the same time. So I know that's not a very helpful answer when you want like a clear kind of idea, but the reason I love HR is because it's not clear. It's about human beings, and human beings are not predictive. So you go into the meeting with sort of an idea of what you're going to talk about, but you hold it very loosely in your mind so that what they need is what you end up providing. So you really, in short, can't go wrong with any of those things. Tell me again, you've got compensation. What are the other buckets that you have to choose from? Training.
Maybe like recruitment, training.
Yeah. So recruiting is exceptionally important. Some of the things that I'm telling you about how I interviewed, I learned by being a recruiter at a retail store that was like 1,000 people. And every sale or holiday, so every couple of months, we would have to hire 100 to 200 people. So I learned how to hire like that. And especially in the startup world, not a lot of people know how to build a system that can allow you to hire very quickly. So that's a very sought after skill. But then after recruiting, you have to know how to take care of the people that you've brought in. So how do you keep them well paid, and compensation fits into that? And then how do you keep them engaged? Training fits into that. So you can't make any mistakes, Alethea. I know it feels like there's one right answer, but be sure to just enjoy everything that you're learning, because all of it will become applicable in your career.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Jabu.
Yes, you're welcome.
Excellent. I've got some chicken and egg questions, Nelly, Jabu. So these are sort of things that I don't know. In a startup, you sort of like what comes before what, right? And
Yeah.
currently, we're looking at building more leadership within our company, and so this is important because we have this active mission, and we need people to pursue it. But in your experience, have you seen what comes first? Does the doer come first, or does the leader come first? And especially in a startup, is like you don't have budget to hire like VPs and everything that sort of like run large teams. So
Right.
you hire these people, and then they progress along, and then
Mhm.
do you reach like a leadership plateau where okay, all right, they sort of are able to function at this maybe individual contributor or slightly and then what do you do? Have you seen that before?
Right.
And what do you do in those cases?
Yeah, I mean, I've often worked and continue to work at places that are very early stage and don't have a ton of money to spend on building really expensive or more experienced teams. So again, I kind of look for people that are just eager to learn and eager to learn while they're doing. I figure that I can teach them what they need to know on the HR side, so say liability and compliance and all the rest of it. I just need them to have a sense of urgency and curiosity and willingness to learn. So I think you kind of have to do, it is a chicken before the egg, but I have companies bringing me in much earlier as an advisor and a consultant, and then helping them build a more junior team until they get to a stage which in the US is typically around 50 to 100 people, where they really do need someone with more experience to help guide that team. But you can get a lot done. Like I coach my CEOs on like, here's the benefits payroll platform that I find the most effective. There's a lot of structural things that can help keep your team fairly lean while you're growing, that are inexpensive and will save you money as you scale. So at Airbnb, for example, I ended up meeting with a woman-founded company called Centricity Solutions. Again, they're not ADP, they're not TriNet, they're not one of the big PEO companies, but they offer amazing service, really scrappy small team, and they will bend over backwards to make sure my client companies are taken care of. So in that area, I spend a little bit more money because if all my HR people quit tomorrow, I would still be able to get my payroll done because they're going to take care of it for me.
Got it. You're outsourcing vital functions so that you have as a service, right? Okay. That's actually kind of funny. One of our concepts is to actually deliver hospitality as a service, so that basically that doesn't happen to anybody, right? So we would then cover like let's say the entire stack of hospitality from cleaning all the way up to payroll management. So that's yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Then that kind of like actually brings me to this question, which is these people that you hire initially, they're very passionate about the company. They have a lot of inspiration. They expect to do big things, but then you're going to have to kind of like put a leader on top of them at some point, right? Um,
Right.
how do you, I've always felt guilty about, or I don't know, I feel weird about that, right?
Yeah.
How should you feel about that? Like, what's the right way to position that? I mean, they're loyal to the company, they want to do good things, but you do need
Right.
a leader, right? Do need somebody who can sort of zoom out and handle
Yeah.
things with bigger controls.
I think most of the people that I hire are people that they may not have a ton of experience, but they can understand bigger picture strategy. And the reason they can is because I don't hide anything from them. So I talk them through everything that I'm doing and why. And I let them know early on, we will be needing to bring in a director, VP level at this stage.
Mm.
So that actually happened to me at Airbnb, where someone was brought in over me that came from a very different company culture, and one where we weren't actually very aligned. And so I ended up leaving because of that.
Mm.
But I think I would have been perfectly happy with it had we had a very similar ethos around how to build a company and how to take care of people. So I think it's just about being as transparent and honest and really explaining the business case for it. A lot of times people assume that it can be understood, like, well, I can learn how to do that. And if you just explain that, Alethea, I need someone that's actually done it before and has done it successfully, as an example. And so that's why I'm bringing this person in. And this gives you an opportunity to really learn from them and be mentored by them. And then I have my team help interview them so that we're making the decision together. So it still may be a little bit of a disappointment for someone, but if they are rational about where they are in their career and eager to learn from someone, then hopefully they're going to be excited by the opportunity.
Okay.
I totally understand why you would feel that way.
Okay, cool. No, that feels like a flashlight right through a spot that I was kind of like unsure about.
Totally.
I was wondering also about like controls, like in
Mhm.
terms of HR. You mentioned earlier that there's this humans are fluid, and that's good, right? That's what we're trying to do. Um,
Right.
how, let's say, what do you believe are the strongest like controls that HR has to affect company
Mhm.
culture? From
Mm.
what I saw, it seemed like HR was quietly behind the scenes, and I thought it was
Mhm.
accidental. When I worked at Airbnb, I thought all this was like, oh, it just sort of happened this way. But then later, I'm studying it. I'm like, no, this is deliberate. This is like not accidental at all. This is actually a lot of people put a lot of thought to have this particular way of layout in the room, of like
Mhm.
the formal Fridays, and what we're going to do at formal Friday, and all that
Mhm.
stuff. So, what did you see as being like the controls of HR to shape company culture?
Yeah. I think it starts at first touch, which is with your recruiting team. So
Mhm.
it's really making sure that your recruiting team is, in my opinion, more emotionally focused than acquisition focused. So, um, really trying to source recruiters that are a little bit less salesy and more human touch, if that makes sense. So you want the experience to be consistent. If you think about recruiting as the first touch and then they hand off to HR, you want that to be a seamless process where there's not like a difference in tone or the way that we speak to that employee. So it's not like we just got them on and now we don't care about them, but it's like a very steady process of being carried gently through this experience.
Got it.
There were a lot of things that were existent at Airbnb actually before I started and got developed without my help. We just had amazing creative people there. But the HR team that I built was actually sourced mostly from internal. So like one of them was an EA that had been working for Brian and wanted to get into HR. And then a few other people from outside very early on who had actual experience doing the work. But it was a mixture of promoting from within, from people who already understood the culture, and then bringing in people who were still fairly junior, but really eager to learn.
Got it.
So I think it's really dependent on what you're hoping to achieve, but trying to build in a cadence, like in terms of the HR work for an employee experience, like how does the employee experience the week? Is it just work? Or are there sort of these celebratory moments, or what you're doing here where there's moments to learn and to engage together and ask questions, and you're bringing in people from the outside to teach people on the inside? That's huge. Like that's something that other startups, for whatever reason, don't always take advantage of and don't have the skill sets to reach out and connect with people and then bring them inside. So the things that you're already doing are really examples of how to create an experience for your employees that will then allow them to sort of propagate that in their work and bring that excitement and that joy to their work. So all of this is interconnected and holistic. You can't really separate it. The more you allow your employees to be creative, I think, and explore different ways of satisfying themselves, the more they will satisfy the people they serve. So I try to be really hands off when I'm managing people, and yet be very consistent. One of the things I learned to do at Airbnb, which I hadn't really done before, was one-on-ones. I always thought, you know, we're sitting right by each other. Like, why do we need to talk all damn day? Like, what? But then I realized, like, they needed one-on-one time to talk to me. The time was not for me, it was for them. So then I released this idea of like needing to control it and just cut that time. And at the time, remember, like, this was the company was bananas. We were going at the speed of light. Like, just giving someone a half an hour of my time seemed really insane. But I made that time for them and they performed better as a result.
Okay, got it. I mean, we've actually seen that the effect of one-on-ones is it's almost like therapy, or yeah, it's definitely a gift, I think, and it gives people a chance to really get those things off their chest and say what they have been thinking about. Okay, great. Let me turn it over to let's say Vidi. Vidi, do you have any questions for Jabu at the moment?
All right. So actually, one thing I'm interested in, Jabu, is delivering bad news. Oftentimes, as a HR, you have,
Yeah.
or maybe leaders in general, you actually have to deliver um, unpleasant news to employee or colleagues.
Yeah.
How do you actually um, do that? Maybe some people have trouble communicating bad news. Maybe
Yeah.
that's
Everybody.
quite.
Yeah. Vidi, I would say that's the hardest thing, even for my CEOs, right? Who you would think are more comfortable having those types of conversations, particularly for HR people. Sometimes it can be almost a daily thing. I wasn't trained on how to do this. When I was promoted into HR at Nordstrom, I had to terminate at least one person a week. And I had no training, and my manager didn't have a lot of time to sit and talk me through it. So I just had to learn by doing it. One of the things that I learned was I always started out the conversation by saying, this is going to be a very difficult conversation. And so that let them know right away that we were having a different kind of a conversation than we'd ever had before. And it was a way of being very honest with them about what was happening in this current moment. And I don't try to make it seem fun. I don't try to patronize them. I'm just very honest about, you know, we have reached the end of our road in terms of you being at this company, as an example, or let's just say it's a performance thing. Then I'm also being really honest about, unfortunately, your performance in this role is not where it would need to be. And this is why. Here's your job description. Here are some ways that you can improve upon that. And here's a certain length of time that I hope to see that. So it's never pleasant, and no one likes to hear that. But on the other side of the coin, it's much less fair to people to not give them the opportunity to succeed. And by not being very direct with them, we actually lessen the chance that they can address whatever the issue is. So if I'm not being clear with you, hey, Vidi, you know, you're doing okay, that's not helpful to you. It would be better to say, Vidi, I would love for you to focus on this, this, and this so that you can be better in this particular area. And then you can work on that, right? So it's taken me many, many years to get good at this. So don't beat yourself up. Like, I think people can appreciate if you are not feeling really great about the car, you can even say that, like, this is really difficult for me to say to you, and I might not be very graceful about it, but I'm going to do my best. So it's just about being really honest with people. People appreciate that.
Absolutely. I'm going to turn to Ara real quick because we've had a discussion just exactly about that recently. Ara, what are your thoughts?
Can I ask about radical candor, maybe, sir? So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
okay. So this is like pretty new. I've actually reading this book by Kim Scott about radical candor. Have you ever heard about it? Yes.
I've met him, yeah.
Okay, so that's actually that's interesting. So pretty much what I'm reading about it is that how a company can go to a growth phase better with being a radical candidate to the employee. So I just would like to know, since you've delivered answering Fidi's questions, how effective or how exactly that usually use that theory as of radical candor in the team.
Kim was actually the coach of the CEO at Shyp. So I got to meet her, go through, yes, before she wrote her book, or while she was writing it, maybe. So it's actually, she and I felt very much the same about this. I think it can be interpreted in different ways. So I've seen some people interpret it almost with too much negativity. So I think there has to be a balance there. I believe that when you manage people, you manage to each person depending on what incentivizes and motivates them. Everybody's different, right? So some people are motivated by praise. Some people actually prefer to have punitive sort of information given to them, like, how can I be better? And some people are really tanked by that. It kind of knocks them out of the game. So it's developing a sensitivity around what each person thinks is radical candor, and or what I call being direct, because that can be really different. And sometimes you can be in a conversation and realize in the midst of the conversation, oops, I have been a little bit too direct, and then you have to kind of wind it back a little bit. So again, it's being accepting that you are human and may make mistakes, and that they are also human, and that we take our jobs and our work very seriously, but at the end of the day, you want to go home knowing that you tried your best to be a good person and to take care of people. So any sort of application of a theory is great, but just finding your own way and your own style through that means that you use your own compass, right? And trust yourself. And you know that internally, I am a good person. I'm trying to do my best work in this role. But also that they are as well. So it's a little bit of a spiritual notion that, I've been fired 3 times in my life. So
I got fired at Airbnb.
I'm sure I would have gotten fired eventually. So, but I'm serious. I was a troublemaker. But to say, like, don't worry about being too perfect. I know everybody does, right? But you will have opinions about how things should go. You'll test them out, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But the way that I was fired at these different companies taught me how not to fire people. So they did it so poorly that I decided any person I fire, of course, it hasn't worked every time, but most of the people I fire, I try to do it in a way that I would want to be fired. So again, this is a human being, no matter what they have done or not done. We want to release them with grace and love, and not judge them for anything that they may have done, because it's not our business to judge people. So that's how I coach my HR people.
Okay, wow, that's really intense and also very inspirational at the same time. Thank you. Speaking of that, actually, so I'm trying to get a handle on what's normal for turnover in startups, because we feel like there's too much turnover. Like we're a fairly startup oriented company in a fairly traditional company, or a very traditional industry. So a lot of people who join hotels, they stay for a very long time. But people who join Bukit Vista, they tend to have like between a 1 to 2 year horizon. And we were wondering how much of that is just due to, like, that's just the way people are now these days, Well, maybe not these days anymore. Maybe now people would, they would stay happily employed in one place. But how much
Yeah.
is due to, let's say, just kind of like the climate of things, and how much of it is due to what we can actually retain? I asked
Mm,
that because I saw the median tenure at Google, which is an
mhm.
enormously like desirable company, is like
Right.
1.2 years or 1.1 year.
That's right.
So then, and looking across Silicon Valley, it's very rare to see people who stay, even at like Airbnb, for very extended
Yeah.
period of time. So
Right.
how do you decide what is? I mean, like, should you say, all right, look, I'm not a successful HR because people are turning over, or should you say,
Hmm.
hey, look, my growth is great, and high growth means things are going to change, and
Hmm.
people will some people will evolve and some people won't.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that, John?
Great question. Yeah, I think in Silicon Valley, it's still 13% is the norm. I could be wrong, but so typically HR, one of the ways that we're judged successful or not successful is our retention metrics. And that includes people who resign. It's not just and people you fire. So unfortunately, all of those are considered your responsibility. Um, so this is why kind of onboarding is so key to our process. And I have a theory, and I'm sure other people do too, that you have about 3 weeks to make a really good impression with an employee, right? And if that's not done well, that shortens the length of how long they stay. But I will say, I do not take responsibility for the startup world's short span of tenure, because I just feel like that's very true no matter what you do. So if an employee stays 3 years at a company, that's considered amazing. Whereas like in retail, people could typically stay anywhere from 20 years on. Right? So it makes our job much more challenging, but also gives us this chance to keep iterating and getting better at what we do, and calibrating to whatever demographic you have that you're resourcing for your employees. It may change now, right? Um, but yeah, if you can refine your skills to keep people engaged and just shift that from 1 year to 2 years, obviously the stress on the company and the stress on the culture is much less. So any gains that you can make there over time are, you know, almost priceless to the success of a company. But at the same time, I don't think you can beat yourself up for what I think is a international cultural change around, you know, right? Around what jobs should provide for people. Like people go to work now and they look for everything at work. Whereas before, it was like you went to work from 9 to 5 and then you did your job and that was it. And you went
Right.
home and had, now it's like you go to work to find your partners, your community, right? Your culture, your excitement, if people aren't engaged, they blame it on the company and they
Yeah.
blame it on a.
Yeah. Yeah.
So instead, like, I think our whole world is on this journey to find out who we are internally and become inspired by ourselves so that we can then bring that to the spaces that we're in. In the meanwhile, I think the reality is that people just have shorter attention spans right now. And so, just maximizing how do we recruit, how do we onboard, how do we prepare for the worst, which would be a 9 months to a year sort of tenure,
Right.
and then optimize for the best.
Got it. Got it. Okay. All right. That's actually really key. I totally agree with you on that sort of honeymoon period, right? Like that
Yeah.
3 week, because I've noticed so many times after that people settle into habits, and if those habits and whatever haven't synced or gelled well with where the company's going, then
Right.
that cause feels more and more lost over time.
That's right.
Okay. All
That's
right.
right.
Really cool. Let's just check and see if anybody else has any final thoughts or questions. Let's go over to Kiki. Kiki, any final thoughts or questions that you'd like to ask Jabu?
Yeah, Jane, of course. Thank you so much for the opportunity. So I'd like to ask regarding the talent pool. So
Mhm.
yeah, I do agree with you that in HR we are focusing on people. We are basically studying people, right?
Yeah.
So now we are focusing on engaging with talent
on personal level in Bukit Vista. So we believe it is important to engage with people
Yes.
in a genuine way. So far, what we have done to engage with these talents are reaching education institution or real
Mm-hmm.
estate institution. We hold webinars. We talk to them as young people, young audiences. We build relationship with them continuously.
Yes.
So, from your experience, I wonder what is the best practice to engage with talented and potential people. I want to know maybe some tips from you. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Thank you. Um, I think it is just what you're saying. It's putting a face to the name of the company. So, it's putting Kiki's voice out there and letting her talk about why she loves to do what she does and why it's important for her to connect with people in a genuine way. People right now, and maybe for a long time, have really been interested in the actual people that are doing the work. So that means that you don't have to be a big name to write a thought leadership piece that is from your perspective, but talking about the work that you do and talking about the brand in a way that is engaging for people, right? A lot of times when we go to work, we forget that our work is special because we do it every day and we get a little bit bored maybe, but from the outside, what you're doing is really fascinating. So just remembering that and talking about it as if that is true makes it true. So that quality that Jing was talking about being lucky is the same quality that you think of in a spiritual context about having appreciation. So you have appreciation for things in your life sometimes even before there's really anything there to appreciate, right? But it's having this constant belief or faith that your life is special and means something, and sharing that more broadly outside to the world. The building relationships piece is key that you're saying, but I would do some written pieces as well. Video obviously is key. Doing what you're doing now. It's video that's going to really be the most interactive, I think, as we go forward. But again, sometimes when you're more junior in your career, you think you don't have anything to share. Like I was very hesitant to share until really quite recently, until people kind of forced me to. But there's no reason that you can't write a book like Kim Scott and write about your own experiences. So, thinking of yourself in a way that you're a very intelligent person and you know a lot already, and maybe you don't know everything, but you can share what you know so far.
Excellent.
Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's great game. So insightful for me. Thank you, Jabu.
You're welcome, Kiki.
Okay, fantastic. Let's go. Let's go to Sing. Sing, do you have any final thoughts or questions you'd like to ask Jabu?
Okay, so okay, actually I think like Jing can prioritize his questions first because I think they are more important. Yeah. So you can go ahead. Yeah, I think all that I wanted to ask, learn about recruitment and onboarding has been answered. Yeah. So
All right. Well,
Okay.
fantastic. Let's see. I've got like a final question, I guess, and this is where it all sort of gels together, right? If you had like one word to offer our HR team on what it takes to be good at doing this, like your master word, right? Like coming from all this experience, distill it down into one sort of attribute. What word would that be, and why would you choose that?
So I cannot follow directions well, Jing. So in life, I would say it's being resilient and
Okay.
being relentless. So relentless,
Okay.
resilient. And so what I coach both my CEOs and my team members is to be the water around the rock, which is just, don't let anything get in your way. Like just because it's there doesn't mean it needs to stop you. And if you think about water never stops. It goes where it needs to go, right?
Uh-huh.
So and then if you do fail at something or you're embarrassed about something, you feel like you didn't do something well enough, it's remembering that that's just how we all grow. So not beating yourself up about it. But just being relentless in the pursuit of your own excellence and excellence in the role that you have. And that means learning as much as you can and driving forward to make the companies that you work for successful. Life, it should be an adventure. It should be exciting and it should be fun. So that's what you're looking for, but you have to bring a significant piece of that as well.
Got it. All right, and bring it. Okay, that is really, really cool. Thank you so much, Jabu, for speaking with us today. And one last thing, we're going to post on our LinkedIn to say thank you and recognize you for this moment. So we'll just take a screenshot real quick. So I'll go ahead and do the screenshot. Everybody will give Jabu a thumbs up, and let's get ready. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, done. Perfect. And oh God, there's so many other questions I'd like to ask, but thank you so much for sharing your time, and thank you for. I remember you said, "Hey, right back on July 15th," and we're like, "Yeah, we scheduled it." We were like, "Okay, we'll do it." And I'm really happy to have this moment, and thank you for also being, I think, an inspiration as well to our team. A lot of them are very new into HR, and to have this experience is quite extraordinary even for me. Right? So thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Let's do a part 2 sometime.
Oh, we'll work on that. We'll talk about how the core values got started. Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.